Okay, we're back. And today I think we're going to talk about a topic that I recently published a couple of blog posts around, which is the concept of telepresence and teleoperation with robotics, and in particular with humanoid robotics, although it's not constrained to just humanoids. Well, we can probably talk about the examples of remote operation that are happening right now in specifically in autonomous vehicles. But there's a little bit more to this topic than sort of immediately meets the eye. And there's some fun historical, I think, and maybe even some sort of fundamentally evolutionary and biological reasons why the idea that you could decouple the mind from the body is pretty alien to normal human experience. So this is a fun topic. I find it particularly interesting because it's one of those things where if you get a sense of where the momentum is going to carry us, it opens the door or cracks the window open to a fun view of the future that's not completely clear otherwise. There's enough going on here that's non-obvious, that's unintuitive, that it's fun fodder for conjecture. And we can think about how might the world change, how might social relationships change, how might business models change when we have a fundamentally new capability that really hasn't existed before. And so this is exactly the sort of fun conversation that I think is so interesting, speaking personally to me. And we have a lot of these internally on our team at RethinkX, but what we haven't done very much in the past is share these sorts of conversations with others, with an audience. So we're going to start doing more of that, and this is maybe a first foray into that general territory. So Brad, do you want to add anything there? I mean, what are your thoughts on teleoperation? What's your take on this at a high level?
I saw this 10 years ago or so. I think the technology wasn't really there. I could sort of see the potential for the idea, and I know that it's an idea that a lot of people have had over time. Wouldn't it be nice to just teleport to some place, basically? I mean, in Star Trek, where you can beam down to the planet and not have to spend any time traveling between places, there are real obvious sort of financial incentives here for doctors being able to do home visits again, rather than we ask sick people to leave their houses and go to a doctor's office. Why not have the doctor come to you, basically? But it finally feels like now we might actually be at a point where this could soon, and I mean on a scale of another 10 years or so, be something that we're actually seeing.
Right. Yeah, so let me jump back historically. The fundamental idea of being able to project your mind, your will, your agency out of your own body to a distant incarnation is an ancient idea. I mean, this is the stuff of myths and legends. The gods of ancient cultures were able to do these sorts of things. They were able to take control, to possess the body of another person, or to animate an inanimate object, to make a statue come to life, to speak through, a stone or a burning bush or a tree or a mountain or something like that. So this idea of being able to decouple mind from body is an ancient one. And it's an ancient dream because the coupling between mind and body in animals throughout all of the history of animal life on Earth, 600 plus million years, is totally and inexorably coupled. There's no decoupling whatsoever there. And so the dream of being able to break that ancient bond between mind and body is an imaginary, aspirational vision, certainly going back into prehistory. So this is an ancient idea, this notion. And, our technology now makes this possible in little baby steps with telephones, a very limited kind of telepresence, and now we have video calls and so forth. And I think a next incarnation of this that could be quite powerful on, again, as you said, sort of a 10-year time horizon, is as humanoid robots take off in popularity, as they are deployed, and eventually in absolutely enormous numbers, they are going to be a clear vector, a clear pathway for exactly the sort of telepresence that we've imagined might be possible. I think there's a convergence, a technological convergence to think about there. So, I mean, I could be wrong about this. I don't want to sort of commit to this idea totally, but it seems to me that virtual reality technology, the goggles, that you wear, combined with either sort of the motion capture technology that goes with VR experiences. I think there are special gloves that you can wear, or alternatively, I think the newest generation or the newer generations of these headsets are able to just, with cameras on the outside of them, watch your hands, watch your fingers, watch your body, and project that into the virtual space. So we have a convergence of technologies that's going to facilitate the remote operation of a humanoid robot. I think that's a straightforwardly nice fit. Interesting timing, right? It could be that this is one of the killer apps for VR, for example. I mean, VR has struggled to find its breakout application. There are games, of course. There are simulations, of course. There are some remote operation applications in industry, for example, and there's some commercial applications of it. But it's not like VR has taken off such that everybody's got one of these headsets in their home, or that every business has one. And we may never get to that point, who knows, but this seems like an interesting potential application that could be very popular. The capacity to, from one location, wherever you are, very conveniently project your physical presence into another location. And I mean, again, like you pointed out, really high value examples of this are going to be, where lives are on the line, where life is at stake. So, the doctor or the surgeon or the emergency responder, the firefighter, the law enforcement or the officer, the soldier that can remotely operate a humanoid robot and dive into a situation where lives are on the line. And as strange as it may seem, being able to do that virtually by remoting in, by teleoperating a humanoid robot opens a fascinating set of possibilities there. Another thing to think about is that if this becomes a very widespread, if this becomes a very popular and very normal capability, we could see interesting new dynamics emerge around, what is socially acceptable, what do we, what things do we tolerate, what things are, how does it change social relations? If, like, are people going to go on dates? Are people going to have dinner with one another where one of them is physically present and the other one is only, virtually present, is only teleoperating the robot? I mean, there are all sorts of fun and strange kooky possibilities that arise beyond just the sort of the mission critical applications and the sort of more mundane things that one might imagine. There's all this sort of goofy sci-fi sort of stuff, both white mirror and black mirror kind of scenarios here, where things could get interesting in a fun way or they could get interesting in a dark way. And we could probably reach into the annals of science fiction and find a bunch of both, a bunch of imagined examples over the past decades of these things. But yeah, we're on the cusp now of this becoming a reality, and it's worth thinking seriously about, I think.
Yeah, I think we might already be seeing some of this with, Tesla's robotaxis and Waymo's robotaxis. It makes sense for these things to have like a consistent personality that would interact with you, that knows your customer history, so that if you're riding in a taxi somewhere, you might interact by voice. There's now speech to text and speech recognition. We now have AI systems that are conversational. So if you're riding along, you could say, I've been to this city before, but I don't remember when was the last time I was here? And it could respond to you. So if you have a consistent AI personality for your robotaxi, then maybe if Tesla makes their Optimus robot and starts selling that, you'd have that consistent personality for that robot too. Now you have humanoid robots in your home or workplace, so it makes sense that you could, teleoperate a robot on the other side of the country or wherever you want. These sort of developments in AI, developments in robotaxis, developments in humanoid robotics, and now telepresence and teleoperation. These are all interconnected with each other, and as one develops further, it pushes the others to develop further as well.
So teleoperation for human beings is an example of where mind and body are decoupled. And, as I said before, this is sort of the stuff of myths and legends, right? But for digital minds, that's just going to be a natural, innate capability. So digital minds are not coupled to a given body. Digital minds are fluid in their physical instantiation anyway. We already have that, even today in very primitive stages where very few of us have set up a personal agent yet, right? Or an AI that's personalized, that has memory on an ongoing basis. We don't have that yet. That's coming very, very soon, but we're not quite there yet. But you can have, for example, with a language model, an AI, ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or any of the frontier models that are on offer to the general public, you can have a chat history. But you're not stuck using one device for that. You can use your phone for part of that, and then put your phone down, walk to another room, use your tablet. You can use voice mode and interact through a smart speaker. You can use your laptop computer if you're out, working or at the coffee shop. So these are all ways that we as the user are able to interface with these systems. That's familiar. But what's hidden there is this underlying capability of a digital mind being instantiated through a new physical channel, a new incarnation, just fluidly, just naturally, automatically, seamlessly. And that is very alien. And so that's the flip side, is that digital minds will be able to have this decoupled mind and body decoupling natively. And that means we're going to take those minds with us without having to take the body along. And that's going to be odd, right? So fast forward 10 or 15 years. There's a humanoid robot in most places of business, indeed in most homes in wealthy countries, in the same way that there are cars and other vehicles in most businesses and in most households have an automobile. It's going to be a similar dynamic like that, right? And would you take your physical humanoid robot with you everywhere? Well, you wouldn't need to, because you can simply take its mind with you everywhere. If it's your personal assistant, or if it is a bot identity that you've grown attached to because it's folded your laundry, it's helped clean the house, it's helped take care of the kids. It won't be very long before these become members of our families, right? But are you going to take the actual physical humanoid robot body with you everywhere? Well, you might not have to if you have, for example, fleet services, and any business that you go to has robots of that same design in the same fleet. Your AI's digital mind can simply teleoperate, can just drop right into, basically teleport into a new body wherever it's available, wherever you go. And so that is the sort of thing that we're talking about. So yeah, this is going to be very strange, having fundamentally different alien minds that are able to just seamlessly pass across bodies. This is fundamentally outside of all human and pre-human experience. And we'll probably adjust really fast, as we have with all of these other technologies that are just, totally alien and marvelous from a historical perspective. But it is a little strange, thinking about this stuff just as we're on the cusp of it arriving. Okay, so one other thing to mention here that, again, is part of the aliens have arrived, as it were, is that when you uncouple mind from body, then you open the door to the possibility that one mind could control multiple and very different kinds of bodies, robotic bodies. So that applies to us. I mean, one could imagine remotely teleoperating a physical incarnation, a body, that is very different from ourselves. Indeed, that's what already happens when a remote driver takes control of a robotaxi, a Waymo or a Tesla or whatever else it is, from the command center, because one of those taxis has gotten itself into a situation that's tricky, and it phones home for help and says, hey, get me out of this situation, I don't know what to do. This is today. Human can remotely operate that. That's like teleporting into a new body, in a way. That's a robot with 4 wheels. Nothing like the human form. And yet we adapt to that perfectly well. So maybe we're going to see other examples of teleoperation that are not just into our familiar humanoid form, although that will feel like a natural fit for obvious reasons. But even stranger than that is the possibility that a mind can control multiple humanoid bodies at the same time. This is really strange, right? I mean, what would it feel like to be operating, to be in control of 2 or 3 or 10 humanoid robots at the same time as one mind? This is really, really strange. This is fundamentally outside of normal human experience. So what are we going to see with that? It's hard to know, but presumably that will open up new applications, potentially new business models, forms of value creation. A new possibility space is fundamentally going to open up here. And in most new possibility spaces, we find ways to capture value, fairly straightforward. Often economic value, but it might be other. It might be social value, it might be entertainment value, who knows what it might be. But this is another very strange shift that's coming. I don't have anything super concrete beyond pointing to the possibility space that's opening up in front of us. Now, what exactly is going to happen, where the value will be captured, that's super hard to anticipate. Again, if you're a fan of science fiction, you might have encountered some fun stories that explore, a little bit of that here and there. The point with all of this is that we're going to be in that world before you know it. Within 10 years, these are novelties and challenges and opportunities that we're going to face. I mean, this is not 100 years away, and so it's just conjecture, science fiction from the armchair, twiddling our thumbs. No, all of this is going to become as real as a heart attack before you know it. These things that were once fun to muse about are now worth thinking seriously about.
It's obviously very dangerous and expensive to put humans into orbit or to the moon. But if we had robots teleoperated, I think it just makes a lot more sense than large numbers of people going into orbit or to the moon. So for something like going to Mars, there's a long communication delay, and it's not always possible depending on where the Earth and Mars are in their orbits. So the idea of a remote operation of a person on Earth operating a robot on Mars is probably not very likely, but we're looking at realistic possibility here of launching large amounts of mass into orbit, maybe to the moon then, and both of those seem like realistic possibilities for teleoperation, and there's no reason why those robots would have to be humanoid in form, or like you said, there could be multiple components operating collectively, being controlled by one person, essentially your left hand and your right hand controlling two separate machines operating as if they were two giant hands, for instance, in order to roll a boulder away, or for tunneling or construction or mining, whatever you want to do on the surface of the moon, or whatever construction you might want to be doing in orbit. So it seems to me like one of the big applications here could be autonomously operating robots, humanoid or otherwise, operating on other planets.
Certainly, yeah. In fact, you raise a great point, which is that there are some pretty inhospitable places on Earth. There are places where it's too hot or too cold. There's underwater, for example. And how interesting would it be if you had an immersive experience? Again, I think virtual reality is a natural fit for this, because the purpose of virtual reality is to give you an immersive experience. But how cool would it be to have an immersive experience where you were in some exotic remote location that would be too difficult or dangerous normally for a fragile human body to be, hundreds of meters underwater, or right at the edge of an erupting volcano. Or one could imagine some fun examples for recreation and entertainment and education. I think we're likely to see in the near term where humanoid robots, for example, are not totally autonomous, where they still need to be able to phone home and ask for help because they don't have all of the capability that a human being has. That will persist for a number of years, certainly. We can imagine construction projects being done under dangerous or adverse circumstances, where it just makes more sense to use humanoid robots. Maybe it's out in the desert and it's too hot or it's too dry. Maybe it's on top of a skyscraper and the risk or just the expense of ensuring human safety is enormous. And much easier to use humanoid robots, and then as and when it's necessary, have a human operator remote in, take control, basically dive into that body with their mind and do whatever needs to get done. I mean, it opens up a whole bunch of fun possibilities, right? I mean, I can imagine virtual tourism where you really do feel like you're there because there is a humanoid robot with eyes and ears and hands and feet there. There are places I'd love to go that I wouldn't go. There are experiences I'd love to have that I would have if they were really immersive virtual experiences, but I wouldn't dare do them in real life. Even if I was a daredevil, I wouldn't take the chance of given the responsibilities to my family that I have, for example. I mean, I might still do skydiving because that's relatively safe. But even that, there's a part of me that says, nah, you know what? You never went skydiving and that was a missed opportunity. You should have done that in your 20s before you were married and had kids. Because now it's a reckless thing to do, and if anything went wrong, and just how stupid would that be? But I would absolutely sign up to have a remote virtual experience, teleporting into a humanoid robot and diving out of an airplane. I would do that. I'd do that this afternoon. That'd be fantastic. So again, there's sort of a whole bunch of possibilities that open up here. Whole business models that are going to emerge from this new possibility space, this new capability.
I would think that skydiving later in life is a better idea. If you jump out of an airplane in your 20s and the parachute doesn't open, you're killing your future children too. But if you do it, that you see these people skydiving on their 70th birthday, their 80th birthday, their 90th birthday, that's exactly the time to do it. So I don't know what it would be like a robot parachuting. You wouldn't really feel the experience of it, the weightlessness and things like that.
Yeah.
So I would think that would not be really the exact same situation. And I think for some things, just, the thrill and the possibility of danger, even if it's not a realistic one. There are people who are afraid of flying on airplanes, even though statistically it's the safest way to travel. But nevertheless, it's so different from your normal daily experience that, of course, you might be fearful of it. I can understand where that comes from. But yeah, I just think the ability to effectively transfer to anywhere in the world, we can already do that now. Like you've said, with telephones, you can hear and talk to places. With cameras, you can see what's going on. But it's not quite the same thing. Even the 3D camera, even with the virtual reality, I've tried those, the sort of 3D immersive things. Lots of people have. You turn your head around, it sort of feels like you're there. But even so, the ability to then manipulate things is the next level.
Right.
To actually move things around goes beyond just sitting there and turning your head and watching things. And that's where you can actually get real work done and, change the world. And like you said, that unlocks the real possibilities as far as, doing work and the possibility space of new business models and of value creation.
Yeah, absolutely. These sort of mission critical examples, we could see early applications emerging out of that where the stakes are so high that it is worth the initially high cost and putting up with the less than perfect fidelity of those experiences. If a doctor just can't get to some remote location, but there's a humanoid robot there, maybe that is an example. Again, thinking of dangerous circumstances, man, there are places where scuba divers work, like working scuba divers, not people who are just scuba diving on a beautiful coral reef, but people who are working underwater. That is a super dangerous occupation. Mm-hmm. And seems like that might be a good fit if we could have teleoperation supplant for being there in person and taking all that risk. Emergency services and first responders, if there's been an earthquake and they're trying to find people amidst the rubble, just the first responders take a huge amount of risk, as we know. And put the robotic body at risk instead of a person and let the person, virtually operate it by teleporting into it. So, I think it's challenging to know where the first opportunities are going to be. It's some combination of cost and capability and also the stakes, like how high are the stakes involved here. And when the stakes are really high, that changes the financial calculus. Sometimes it can be worth a much, much greater investment if you're able to avoid an enormous amount of risk, for example. And so we haven't done a formal analysis to try to assess where the opportunities are in this space and what might emerge first and when. But the calculus would certainly include risk and stakes and the degree of responsibility for critical errors that might occur, loss of life and limb. Those would be factors that we'd have to consider if we analyze this formally instead of just sort of musing about it. But I don't know if
Sure.
RethinkX is going to do that work. But hey, if you're looking for something interesting to do, maybe you can think about doing it.
Yeah, I think risk is part of it. So, like you said, risk to your life. Underwater welding, for instance, these scuba divers who do underwater welding are paid very highly, in part because it's risky work, but also because they're very time limited. So you can only work for certain periods of time at depth. And then it's so taxing on the body as well that the length of your career is quite short. You do it for a number of years when you're young, and it's not something that you do your entire life. So you have to train for something that you can only do a limited number of years, you can only do a limited number of hours at a time, and it's very dangerous. So I would think, like you said, first responders, soldiers, anything that's risky, or that you can only do for limited amounts of time. Scientists who are gathering lava at the edge of the volcano, people who work in Antarctica, you can only be outside for a certain amount of time, those sorts of things. But with a robot, if you lose the machine, nobody wants to destroy a valuable piece of equipment. But at the same time, you can bring it back inside, warm it up, put it back out again, and keep doing that over and over again over a 24-hour period. If it's doing something dangerous that's otherwise time limited for people, you just get a lot more effectiveness out of it. This is the same sort of thing we've been talking about with human-driven cars versus autonomous vehicles, which is that they can just be used more hours a day. Right. It just changes the economics. I would think that any job that's difficult, dangerous, repetitive, boring, high in worker injury rates, anyone that you can only do a certain number of hours a day or a certain number of years in your lifetime before you're just too worn out to keep doing it, those would all be things high on the list. And if AI isn't there yet, you teleport in or teleoperate, and as the AI capabilities increase, then humans get reduced to called in as necessary as remote assistance, and then eventually no human intervention necessary at all.
Yep, I think that's exactly right. Exactly right. Well, it's a fascinating frontier of development, and again, we're not going to have to wait 50 or 100 years to see how this all plays out. The tidal wave is looming, and it's going to crash over us over the next decade, and we'll find out what these crazy new possibilities are that are opening up. So yeah, well, I think we'll wrap it up here for today. But it's just one of many fun new avenues to consider as the multiple disruptions across fundamental sectors of the economy are unfolding simultaneously: energy, transportation, food, labor, and more. And we're just scratching the surface with it. So there's just an endless number of things to think about and talk about here. And we're going to continue to do that with this series. So stick with us, and we'll see you next time.
Great. Thank you.